this framework that I use, for lack of a better term, of that Aviate, Navigate, Communicate crisis management protocol that pilots use. I discovered is a very applicable framework that individuals and leaders can use in essentially any situation. I would challenge folks to tell me, a situation where it wouldn't be applicable. And so that's kind of my goal, is to equip individuals and leaders with this Aviate, Navigate, and Communicate framework that they can then embrace for their own organizations. If you think about that metaphor of Aviate, Navigate, Communicate, just to remind folks of what happened on that date on January 15th, Sully takes off from LaGuardia Airport. It's supposed to be a 2-hour flight down to Charlotte on an Airbus A320 aircraft, about 150 people and 5 crew members on board. They take off, perfectly clear day in Manhattan. For those who've taken off from LaGuardia, you take off and you fly right over downtown Manhattan. And about 1,500 feet or so, 2,000 feet after, just really about probably a minute and a half after taking off, a flock of Canada geese, which are these big, meaty, feathery geese that had been migrating, get sucked into the engines on this.
No, I don't remember that at all.
Yeah. And so exactly. So both engines, literally, imagine at low altitude, you're looking out the window, you're maybe just starting to slip your shoes off. And you can still literally see the cars on the ground. I mean, that's how close to the ground they were.
Right.
And all of a sudden, you know from flying a lot yourself that takeoff is when the plane's the loudest. You just have the thrust of the engines, even with your noise canceling headphones. You just feel it's hard to watch your movie or listen to music. And so all of a sudden, imagine the opposite happening. The plane just goes silent. The engines are just dead. There's no thrust. It turns into a glider. And so Sully just instinctively, because he's such a well-trained pilot, and Jeff Skiles, who was his first officer, co-pilot, they aviated. Which is the number one rule in flight school. When something happens, aviate, which is basically translated to stabilize the situation, keep the plane flying. And what they did was they instinctively put the nose down. Instead of trying to pull up, you would think as you're kind of going towards the ground with no thrust, you'd want to pull up. They did the opposite. They put the nose down to regain momentum, like a bike going down a hill, so they'd have more time. And that, by aviating, that gave him the time to figure out where he was going to navigate. So if you listen to those transcripts, which are available online, you'll hear Sully talking to the air traffic controller and figuring out where he's going to land. And so he literally decides, okay, he can't go back to LaGuardia, can't go to JFK, all the winds. He's doing all these calculations real time, real fast. And he ultimately decides he has to land on the Hudson River. So he navigated. He figured out, he aviated, bought the time, figured out where he needed to land. He navigated on the Hudson River. And last and not least, he finally gets on the intercom. The last thing he does about 30 seconds before the plane splashes down in the Hudson was he gets on the intercom to talk to the flight attendants and the passengers, and says, "This is your captain, brace for impact." And so he aviated, navigated, and ultimately communicated. And so that was a casebook example in terms of how to follow that just classic piloting framework.